Congratulations on your decision to learn Microsoft Project. This is one of those programs that after you know it, wow, it makes so many things so much easier than they used to be. And it reduces stress and allows you to take great big projects, the kinds that people put on your desk and say, hey, can you take care of this? That previously would have made you say, okay, I guess, and internally you kind of freak out. And you freak out during the whole time of the project. Instead of that, you can sit down with the software and carefully plan out everything that needs to happen, when it needs to happen, how long it's going to take, if you have any deadlines. You can assign people to work, and Microsoft Project will say, okay, here's your schedule. And the nice thing about it is if something changes, then Project can get in there and say, oh, hey, by the way, in 6 months you're going to miss this deadline coming up. Or there's no way you can make that happen with the resources you have available to you. And then you can plan and make sure that everything runs smoothly instead of wondering, what am I forgetting about, which is the normal way of doing things. The software does require some careful thinking in the beginning, and you'll probably spend more time planning your projects than you did before. But really, this is a good thing, because the time that you spend planning will be made up many times fold on the back end from not making mistakes and poor time estimates. My name's David Lieberman. I run the e-learning department here at Learnit Anytime, and we use Microsoft Project pretty extensively. It's incredibly helpful in our day-to-day operations and also when we plan bigger projects. So it's really my pleasure to show you how to use Microsoft Project. Just so you know, this class is designed for you to follow along with. It's not just watch it on TV, it's experience it like a real class. So there'll be times where I'll advise you to press pause and go try things yourself, but you can feel free to do that at any time until you feel comfortable. Also, once you get to the point where you feel like you can do something, go ahead and build yourself little mini projects as you go. Now, it's best if you pick something to practice with that's real world. Education studies show really conclusively that if you practice on real world projects, that what you learn sticks much better. However, let me recommend that you don't pick anything very complicated. While you're learning how to use the software, you don't want to have to think too much about the projects that you're working on. So pick something easy, but that's real to you. So maybe this is something you did before already, or something that you've really got down pat. Great. Are you guys ready? Okay, let's go learn Microsoft Project. To get the most out of Microsoft Project, we're going to change a setting that the program comes with by default. You see, the thing is that really the power of this program is you tell it all the things you've got to do and in what order they have to happen in, how long everything takes, and Project will say, okay, then here's your schedule for you. Because on big projects, you often end up with a plan that's way more complicated than you could normally schedule comfortably in your head or even on a piece of paper in a calendar. But for years, people have used Microsoft Project and they didn't really understand how to use it. They picked it up and said, well, it looks like Excel. And so they used it as a fancy calendar program to where they'd type in a task and then just set a start and finish date. And so a couple of versions back, the people at Microsoft decided that, okay, well, by default, then that's the way the program's going to come. Most professionals that use Microsoft Project change it so that the tasks aren't by default manually scheduled. Instead, they're automatically scheduled based on the tasks and durations and relationships between the tasks that you tell Project exist. So we're going to go change that right now in the options. This is something you absolutely want to do as well. If for whatever reason you're not in front of Microsoft Project right now, make a big note, put it on a sticky, stick it to your monitor, do something, because most of the things that we'll do today will rely on this happening a little bit. So here's how it works. We're going to go up to the File tab, and we're going to go down to Options where all of the options are. After we're there, remember that what we're setting is the way that Microsoft Project schedules the project, right? Which is why it makes sense that we're going to go up to Schedule. After we click Schedule, Here in the middle, you'll see a couple of things going on. First off, you've got this pull down that says scheduling options for this project, and it's got project 1 in there, or all new projects. We'll put it on all new projects so that it changes all of the projects coming out and not just this one we're on now. And underneath that, it says new tasks created. By default, you'll see it says manually scheduled. We're going to change that to auto scheduled. So this is what you'll want to do. Go ahead and pause the video, go up to File, down to Options, click Schedule, and change scheduling options for this project to all new projects, and new tasks created for auto scheduled. Go ahead, I'll wait. Okay, now that you've done that, go ahead and hit OK. Now you might note that it said all new projects should be like that. That's why this current project is still set up in the old way, manually scheduled. You can actually see that right down here where it says new tasks manually scheduled. If you want to, you can change this one project by opening that up and choosing auto scheduled. Or you can just start a brand new project by going up to File and clicking New and choosing a blank project. Either way, let's make sure on yours that down in the corner, you've got new tasks being auto-scheduled, and then we're ready to start building. When looking at Project, you'll probably notice that it looks a little bit like Excel, doesn't it? Microsoft Project actually is based in Excel. And you can do some of the same things in Project that you can do in Excel, so that's nice. But navigating through these cells is pretty easy as well. Once you start putting in tasks, you'll notice that some of these columns are automatically filled in with placeholder information. And there's a graphical side over here that kind of gives you a graphical view of the project. You notice we're starting on Friday, and there's Friday. This graphical side is called the Gantt chart, and it's a representation of the way that people used to map out projects by hand. There are more columns underneath here, and later we'll learn how to change those columns, but you can move around this little line to reveal or hide columns. A nice thing to keep in mind is that when you print Microsoft Project, it prints the same view that you're looking at right now. So if I get rid of the Gantt chart won't print. Or vice versa, if I only love pretty pictures, I can do something along the lines of that. Make sense? Now up on the top you see the standard ribbon that most Microsoft programs have. You'll notice there is no Home tab. Instead, the Home tab is the Task tab, because primarily we're working on tasks, right? And then the other tabs just sort of make sense. For example, if you're looking to print reports, you'll probably head your way over to the Report tab. If you're changing the view, you've got View. Formatting we'll do later. The Project tab is made specifically for things that you'll set project-wide. For example, if we go to the Project tab, here we'll see information about the project, like when it starts and things like that. And change working time, where we'll go to change project-wide calendar settings. Make sense? Either way, we'll spend most of our time on task. Couple of other little things. Down in the lower right-hand corner, there's a little zoomy tool so you can zoom in for all your zoom needs. You'll notice that what's actually zooming here is the calendar itself, is the Gantt chart, but not the text. To change the text size, you actually change the text size up on the top. So you can zoom in on the Gantt chart. You can get pretty far in or pretty far out. It's up to you. And later we'll explore more view options up in the View tab. Now, one other thing about Microsoft Project to keep in mind, and this is new for the 2016 version, basically the Help menu is a lot more helpful. And now it's called Tell Me What You Want to Do. So for example, if I clicked up there and typed print reports, yeah, I see all the different things that I can type. You got view recent reports. We haven't really made any, so you don't have a bunch of things there. Let's decide that I just wanted to go to print instead. So I click it, and it brings me right to it. So one of the really nice things with this is that you don't have to memorize where things are. In fact, memorizing your way through it is kind of a losing game anyway. You can use the new help menu, which they call Tell Me. You can rewatch parts and Learnit Anytime, or remember, Google knows most of these things as well. Now, speaking of Google, sooner or later you'll probably have a question about Microsoft Project that you can't readily answer or find on the web. That's why it's nice to know that you can always come in and search for Microsoft Project Forum to find the online message boards. Now, almost every piece of software has a forum, and you generally have to sign up, but they're all free. And you go ask some question and some nice person comes along and answers you. Project is a pretty deep program, so often people wonder, oh, could I do this or that? And often the answer is yes. That doesn't mean that it's always readily apparent. Being willing to check Google and then to ask a question on a forum is really a way you climb into the high-level choices here. Okay, if you guys are feeling ready, let's start making ourselves a project. Okay, now remember, these lessons really are made to be followed along with. It's very difficult to just watch something on the screen and then really be able to do it later. Now you can download the file that we're going to build together in the Resources tab. So if you want to take a deeper look, that's fine. However, looking at a finished file doesn't always help much, but when you build something, now you can really do it. We're going to pick a kind of easy project that maybe everybody can relate to. And because life should be good, why don't we have a party? You've all been to a party that was poorly planned, and you've also been to a party that was very well planned and executed, and so let's make sure that we're well known for throwing great parties. Now, in real life, Microsoft Project is designed for you to get in and put in every task that you're going to do, even if they're tasks that you'll remember. The idea is to build a firm schedule and to think of everything. So it's not uncommon for projects to have 300, 500, 2,000 tasks sometimes. Because we'd all like to learn projects sometime soon, we'll shorten our tasks for brevity. But in real life, you pretty much want to put in every task that you can possibly think of, as long as it's not something super silly, like turn on the computer or close the door. And later, we'll give you guidelines as to how deep do you want to go. Good? So normally the way it works is you put your tasks in chronological order, or at least as best you can, and you break them into phases. You can create the phases later, or at the beginning if you know what they are. Let's go ahead and type. I like to type my phase names in all uppercase letters. That's not really best practice or otherwise, it's just that it's easier for me to see. So I'll have a planning phase. Then I'll hit enter. In the planning phase, we'll have to make the guest list. You don't need to use title case or sentence case, just go ahead and type. And then maybe we'll create the invitations. We'll get a marketing or graphic design team to do that for us. And we've learned the hard way before that we want to proofread the invitations. And then we're good. So next we'll go ahead and do our shopping phase. And as soon as we type the shopping phase, we recognize, oh, I forgot to write anything about mailing the invites. It's not going to be a very fun party if no one comes. So there are a number of different ways that you can insert a task. On the ribbon, you've got a pull-down menu up here for task, and you can insert a task like that. You can also right-click just like you might in Excel, or my favorite way, on the keyboard. You know the insert key on your keyboard up in the upper right-hand corner? If you press the insert key, voila, new task. Nice, isn't it? So let's make sure we mail the invites. In the shopping phase, we'll buy food and drink, and we'll buy decorations. Then let's go ahead and have our party phase. My party phase was most of my 20s, and 30s really. And in the party phase, we will greet our guests, and then we'll have fun. After we have fun, the party will be officially over. Good? Now, here's the thing. What we're effectively doing here is building an outline, just like you might build an outline in Microsoft Word, right? But when you build an outline, you would normally have tasks indented under other tasks, right? Well, you do in Project as well. Here's how it works. You basically highlight the tasks that you want to indent, and then if you look up here on the ribbon, you'll see there's a little arrow pointing in, right? So check it out. Indent. Notice they all popped in, and now Project recognizes planning phase as a phase, what Microsoft Project calls a summary task. You might notice that the Gantt chart changed as well. So I'm going to indent tasks there. And I'll indent these. Now you can have phases within phases, and you can have phases within those phases. You can go pretty deep. There's no real practical limit. For today, just to keep it simple, we're going to keep it like this. But underneath buying food and drink, in real life, there'd be a number of tasks that you need to complete, right? Okay, note that now Project thinks these are all happening on the same day. We'll have to fix that later. And it thinks they're all taking the same amount of time. But what we've done here is the first thing that you do when planning a project. Now, it's important to keep in mind that project managers are not really expected to know how everything works. Really, you're the organization get-it-done person. So as a project manager, you might be doing an awful lot of walking around and having meetings and sitting down with people and saying, okay, what comes next and what comes next and what comes next. Please resist the urge to plan out everything all at one time. Generally, when you keep your eye on one task, like just making a big list of tasks, then you can come back and focus on how long those tasks take and who will do those tasks. Focusing on one thing at a time gives your brain a chance to really get in the zone. You know, in the zone? Studies have shown that multitasking really doesn't work. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video. You can leave the screen up so you can see mine. And let's make a list of phases and tasks. Make sure that you indent your tasks as you go. If you want to experiment and make a project on your own, that's a pretty good idea. And let's also do this one because we're going to do some situational things as we go that will fit much better with this project. Pretty easy so far, right? Okay, so we made a great big list of all the tasks we needed to complete, and we broke them into phases. Once they're broken into phases, you can roll those phases up to get them out of your phase, or you can leave them open if that's the kind of person you are. Just so you know, what we just did normally can take quite a long time, but when you're done, it feels so much better. You've really moved the project forward quite a bit now. Okay, so after we've got our list, then we're going to come back and say, here's how long these things take. Let me ask you a question. Let's say that tomorrow you had to sit down and write a one-page paper all about everything you learned in Microsoft Project. How long do you think it would take you to write that one-page paper? Some people type fast, they say 10 minutes. Some people say half an hour. Back when I was in college, it used to take me about an hour per page because I'd go back and check it carefully and freak out about wording. Okay, now think about the way that it really is in the workplace. People come by and bug you, or ask for help, or the email goes ding, or the phone rings, all those little things that happen. Now how long are we talking about to get this one-page paper? It might be all day, right? In fact, it wouldn't be strange at all to say, I'll get that to you by tomorrow. What we're talking about here is the difference between man-hours and duration. Man-hours is the number of hours that people put in, and duration is how long does it take between you've started the task and when you've actually finished the task. You see, people inherently are very bad at estimating time, because most of the time we jump right away to man hours and don't really think about duration. So as a project manager, that little speech that I just gave about, okay, now think about the way it really works around here, where people come by and talk to you and ask you to do things, and the email goes bing, now how long do you think it's going to take? That'll be a speech that you'll become pretty comfortable with giving. And then after people have heard it a bunch of times and you've educated them on how duration works, you'll be able to slow down. Just so you know, the official term for man hours in Microsoft Project is called work. In the normal project nomenclature, man hours are officially referred to as effort. And again, the time between start to finish is duration. So we're going to roll down our duration column here and put in durations for our tasks. Now this part's important. You won't put in a duration for the phases. The phases are basically just categories or intellectual structures. They're not really things that you do. The tasks underneath are the things that you'll do. The phase durations will be automatically calculated based on the duration of the tasks underneath and the order in which they need to happen. Ready to go? Okay, let's do it. So let's say that making the guest list is being done by a committee. So even though there might be just an hour or two of work in there, we're going to give it 3 days to actually happen. Days are the default duration in Microsoft Project because that's how it works. So if you just type 3 and hit enter, it'll say 3 days. And you'll notice the little question mark has gone away because you actually put in an input. If you've ever asked a marketing department or a graphic designer to do something, you know those things take a lot longer than you would think. And they're probably already busy. So let's say that we go talk to the director of marketing, and they say, yeah, you better give us 3 weeks to make those. For weeks, you type W. Okay, here's what you get. You've got days, weeks with W, hours with H, minutes are M. Now you can actually do months with MO and years with year, but in general, when you ask someone how long something's going to take and they say, 3 weeks, that's just a guess. So in the next section here, we'll talk about what to do when that comes up, but usually it means digging further down. Let's say proofreading the invites takes 3 days. And again, remember that's not sitting down for 3 days straight. It's just give me 3 days to do it. And mailing the invites is going to take half a day. So I'll put 0.5 days. If I'd prefer, I could say 4H for 4 hours. Buying food and drink will give someone half a day to do that. And people will probably be driving all over Earth and ordering things from the internet to buy decorations. So let's give people 3 days. Now we're in our party phase. These times are going to be a little tighter because it's in real time. Let's greet guests for 2 hours. Hopefully everybody will be there then, and we'll have fun for 4 hours. Now the party over is not really a task, it's a moment in time. A moment in time is referred to as a milestone. Other milestones might include the beginning of the project, a contract being signed, first payment coming in, reviews for the project, those types of things. Either way, the way you make a milestone is you tell it how long it takes. And remember, a point in time takes 0 time. To create a milestone, you just put in 0 in duration. And when you hit enter, notice you've got 0 days here, and also a fancy little graphic over in the Gantt chart. Okay, so the most important part here is that duration and man hours are not the same, and that we tend to estimate with man hours. The second most important part is that you don't set durations for the planning phases. If you did, it would let you do it. Look, if I came in here and set 10 days, it would allow you to do it. You might get some graphical representation, see it turned red, and also the task is changed to a manually scheduled task. You can see that over there with the little push pin. To change it back, you can just click the little push pin and change it to auto-scheduled. Okay, so on your project, let's roll down and make it look like this one. And if you haven't made one yet, go ahead and start a little project on your own. Remember to keep it simple. And pick something that's real to you. When you're ready, come back, press play, and we'll move on. Okay, so in real life, sometimes you'll be faced with a task, and when someone asks you how long is that going to take, or you ask a subject matter expert, the real answer is I'm not sure. So for example, a little while ago, I had to, in my personal life, replace a garbage disposal. I figured it would take a couple of hours, but it ended up taking me all day. If instead of just guessing, I stopped to think, well, how long is it going to take me to clear the underneath of the sink? And then how long is it going to take me to take the old garbage disposal out? And then how long is it going to take me to go to Home Depot on a Saturday? And so on, I would have broken the task into smaller, more manageable tasks that I would have been able to estimate good durations for. So when asking yourself, how far should I break down this task? What's officially called decomposing the task. Best practice is to break it down until you can accurately and with confidence estimate a duration. Those are the important words, accurate and confidence. You might even use those words when talking to your subject matter experts. If they give you a duration, you can say, okay, are you confident that that's accurate? And if they say, well, that's when you start breaking the task or decomposing the task down further. For example, creating the invites could be broken down into meeting with the team, creating a rough draft, creating revisions, submitting the final, and any final revisions. Make sense? Today we're going to keep it simple, and in the real world, that's how you do it. Now, let's say that when you go and talk to the marketing director about creating the invites, you ask them how long it's going to take. They say, well, it might take us 3 weeks, it might take us a month, maybe 3 days if we really hustle. And you say, well, I am a project manager, and so I need to put in something. And they say, well, put in 3 weeks, right? And so that's what we've got here. You're probably going to want to mark that as an estimated duration, and you'll want to leave yourself notes as well. Happy project managers are project managers who notate everything, because in 3 months from now, when somebody comes and asks you, hey, what happened with that? And you don't know, it's you who looks bad, right? So if you're trying to do something fancy on a task, basically, a pretty good bet is to double-click that task and then look around. So we've got create invites right here. We've already got 3 weeks on it. If I double-click and I look around, on the General tab, and actually on the other tabs as well, up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll have Estimated. Do you see where that is? So if I click Estimated, I can click OK. And now notice that you've got this little question mark that shows up next to the duration, and you can print reports or filter for estimated tasks. Now remember, we're going to leave ourselves notes as well. So again, it's double-click the task for anything fancy, and we'll look around and look at this tab set up for us called Notes. Now if I click it, I can leave myself a note. Maybe I'd write something like this. Best practice is generally the date, the title of the note, and the actual note. Now take note that when you're making notes, there isn't a way to set up reminders for yourself. So basically what you'll do is go into Outlook or whatever other calendar you use to keep track of your normal day-to-day tasks and set yourself a reminder. When I click OK, look, you have a cute little note. You can roll over it and it'll tell you the note. You can also print a report with notes. Most of the time that you're going to be reading the notes, you'll go to a task, notice that there is a note, and double-click and read the notes. Now, leaving these notes are nice, but sometimes just one task can have lots and lots of tracking that you need to keep track of just to notate where you are on that task. So if you're keeping tighter documentation, or if a task has attached documents like a contract or something like that, you might want to link tasks to an outside document. The way that works, it's pretty easy. You find the task, and then you're going to right-click it. Strangely enough, there is no button on the taskbar to add a link. So I'll give it a right-click, and go down to Hyperlink, which is strangely below my screen right now. You can either click Hyperlink, or you can do Control-K, which is the shortcut for Hyperlink in every Microsoft product. Either way, after you open it up, then you can just browse to the file. I've got a file on my desktop here, a contract. Click OK. Oh, look at the cute little earth and chains. The way that it works is you roll over, you have to wait till you get the little finger there. Give it a click. Sometimes it asks you if it's okay to open. You tell it, yeah, go for it. And here's your attached contract. Now, it is important to note that if you send this project to someone else and they click the link, if it's linked to a file on your desktop, they're not going to be able to open the link. So you might consider putting linked files somewhere on a shared network drive or something like that. So we've done a couple of things here. We double-clicked a task to leave a note, and also to set the duration as estimated, which you can find in the corner of every tab. And we hyperlink to an outside file by either using right-click or Control-K. Now's a good time for you to try those yourself. Go ahead and mark a task as estimated duration, leave a note about it, and while you're at it, why don't you go ahead and link to an external file? Pretty fun, huh? This is the world of project management. Now that we've created an organized task list and entered in durations, it's time to come back and put these tasks into order. As you might notice, right now, Microsoft Project thinks that all of the tasks are starting at the same time. And some of these tasks absolutely may be able to start at the same time. But in real life, that's not how it works. So we'll have to come in and say things like, this task needs to finish before we can begin that task, and so on and so on. So let's make that happen. Here's the way it works. You generally start up at the top of the list, and you say, okay, what's dependent on this task finishing before it can start? So basically, what comes after the task I'm on right now? So we've got Make Guest List, and we look at the next one, Create Invites. Do you have to totally finish creating the guest list before you start making the invites? Not really. The design team could be working like crazy on the invites while you're making the guest list, right? So those two tasks aren't dependent on each other. So what I'm going to do is look down the list until I find one that is dependent on Make Guest List. And if I'm carefully looking down, I found one, because you certainly can't mail the invites until making the guest list is finished, right? Okay, here's how that works then. I'll click Make Guest List. If they were right next to each other, I could just highlight down, but they're not. So instead, I'll hold Control and go click Mail Invites. You see I've got them both now? And then up on the ribbon, I've got this cute little link button to link these tasks together. When I click it, you'll see maybe that the dates changed. In fact, the things that are highlighted are things that changed. That's why they highlight. And on the Gantt chart, you'll see that the graphical representation has changed, saying, hey, making guest list needs to totally finish before we can mail the invites. Make sense? Remember that you hold Control to do it. Go ahead and pause the video and try that on yours. Link making the guest list to mailing the invites. Okay, let's continue down the list. So next I go to Create Invites. Do I need to create the invites before I proofread the invites? Pretty much. So I'll highlight those and link. Do I need to proofread the invites before I mail the invites? Also yes. So I'll highlight those and link. If they're right next to each other, you don't have to hold control, you can just drag over them. Now you might notice that on the graphical side, it's starting to get bigger than the view allows. If you want to, you can go up to View and view the entire project. It'll change the zoom. After a while, the graphical Gantt chart gets a little bit too complicated to really look at, but in the beginning it's really nice. Okay, so I can link mail invites to the whole shopping phase if I wanted to. You can link tasks to phases, or phases to phases, or you can link phases to tasks. People argue about it as they like to argue about most things. Some people say you should only link tasks to tasks because you really do tasks and phases are just intellectual constructs. For the purposes of this class today, we're going to link the task to the shopping phase. So I'll go ahead and link that one. Back on the Task tab, I'll click Link. And we'll link the whole shopping phase to the party phase. Link. And down here in Greet Guests and Having Fun and Party Over, we'll go ahead and link all three of those together. Now when I link a task to another task, I've set up a task relationship. So officially, Having Fun is a predecessor to Party Over. A predecessor is something that comes before something else, right? That's part of the official language, by the way. A predecessor is a task that comes before another predecessor. And if you move the little divider out of the way, you can see predecessors here. So go ahead and pause the video, and let's make sure that your project looks like mine. Start with going ahead and linking in a way that you think makes sense. It's okay to experiment, but when you're done, check out the screen and let's make sure that your predecessor column looks the same as mine does. After you're done making sure that your file looks like my file, now's a good time to practice on your own as well. So make sure that you've got a list of tasks that are broken into phases, with durations, and go through and set up links. We're really doing something now. Okay, project managers, there are a couple of little fancy things about links that you should probably know, so you don't have to do anything, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here. And I'll make task 1, and task 2, and task 3. And we'll play around with them a little bit. So here's the first thing you'll want to know. The direction that you link in does matter. So you might remember that before I clicked a task, came down into the task list and held control and clicked another task and linked. You'll see the link works like that, right? Well, if I undo that, if I go the other way, I start on the bottom, hold control and link up. It does allow you to do that, doesn't it? That's because in real life, sometimes there are tasks lower down in the list that need to complete before another task starts. And we'll use this to do some fancy things with later. The thing is, right now, you want to make sure that you're not doing it by accident like yours truly did a whole bunch of times. Make sense? Okay, I'll break those links with the little broken chain. And here's something else you'll want to know. It's totally okay to click and drag going down and link, but if you try the same thing going up, I start here and go up, maybe because I wanted to, it figures, meh, I know what he's trying to do, and it just still links it going down. So later, if you do want to link going up, you do have to click the task, hold control, and click the next task, even if they're right next to each other. Make sense? I'm going to break all of these links. Here's something else you'll want to keep in mind. Let's say you've got a series of tasks, and you link them all. Ooh, that was fast. And then later you come and say, oh, I forgot about task 2.5. So I'll click and hit insert on my keyboard, and put in task 2.5. Now you note that it just showed up right here, yes? In the preferences, you can change it so that when you put in a task in the middle of a series, that task is automatically added to the series. But personally, I don't recommend it because it'll happen by accident when you didn't really mean it to happen. Now, if you do want to link here, remember T2 is linked to task 3, so you might need to break that task relationship, and then link down the new series. Go ahead and take a minute to try that. Link going upwards, and link in a series. You might even try putting a new task into the middle of the series, because that's the kind of thing that happens in real life. If you try it though, try it on a new file. We don't want to mess up our party plan. Now we're off to a good start. But there are some things that we're definitely going to have to deal with if we're going to use a plan like this in the real world. For example, we still haven't told it when our party is going to start. We will. But based on the schedule that we made, Microsoft Project thinks that we can mail the invites on Wednesday and then have the party on Monday. And that's probably not going to work out so well. We need to make sure that there's at least 3 weeks or a month in between mailing the invites and actually having the party. The interesting thing about that month is it's not really a task. No one's doing anything. It's just the project is just kind of waiting or lagging, right? When a project is lagging, they call that lag time. And lag time occurs for a number of different reasons. For example, you might be waiting on a signature, or waiting for cement to dry, or basically waiting for one of the many myriad of reasons that projects just end up waiting. So let's learn how to put in lag time. Here's how it works. So we had linked mail invites to the shopping phase, right? We'll put the lag in here just to make it simple. Here's how you do that. Basically, you double-click the second task. So in this case, it'll be the shopping phase. So I double-click. Ooh, and I get this neat little box opening up. Now the thing is, you don't have to memorize the things that are in this little box. If you remember that to do fancy things to a task, you double-click the task, you're pretty solid. Then you can just look around until you find what you want. Now remember, when you make a link, what you're actually doing is creating predecessors, tasks that come before other tasks, right? That's probably why we'll use this predecessors tab. When you click it, it says, hey, we're talking about the shopping phase, and the predecessor is mailing the invites, and if you look over here on the side, we've got lag time. Let's give ourselves 3 weeks in between mailing the invites and starting the shopping. So I'll just type 3W and hit OK. Now you might notice that my graphical side sort of shot off into nowhere, so I'll go up to View and view the entire project. Oh, look at that nice lag time there. Lag time is quite common in real projects, so it is important that you know how to do it. You double-click on the second task in the sequence and set lag time on the predecessors. If you're like me, you might double-click on the wrong task. But generally, there's only 2 tasks, so if you do the wrong one, go double-click on the other one. Okay, let's go ahead and set lag time here by double-clicking on the shopping phase and setting 3 weeks of lag, and then look through your project to see if you can find any place that lag would make sense. Even if you can't really find anything, let's go ahead and put something in there now anyway, just for practice. And then when you're ready, let's move on. Okay, you guys are working your way towards some pretty professional project management here. And now we get to come to one of the more fun things that you can do. We're going to work with non-standard task relationships. So, for example, let's say that you were writing a book. Would you have to totally finish writing the book before you started proofreading? Probably not. But with what we've done now, every task is totally finishing before the next task starts. We might have tasks whose start date is dependent on each other, but otherwise things can just go whenever. or the same with the finish date. Let's go over the non-standard task relationship types. So the standard link relationship, when we're linking two tasks together, says that the first task has to finish before the second task can start. That task relationship is the most common and is officially referred to as a finish to start relationship. Now, let's say that you were doing a great big quarterly meeting, and you have the audio-visual team in the meeting to record the meeting. One of the tasks would be run the meeting, and the other task would be to video the meeting, right? In that situation, the first task needs to start before the second task can start, and that's referred to as a start-to-start relationship. And then sometimes, you have things like drywall. And then sometimes you have things like, in construction, you can't finish the drywall until you're finished the electrical, because you can't put up the walls until the wires are done. That type of relationship, where the first task has to finish before the second task can finish, is referred to as a finish-to-finish relationship. There's a fourth relationship that doesn't happen often, but we'll learn a cool trick with it, called a start-to-finish relationship. When a start-to-finish relationship happens, it basically means when one task starts, the other task is finished. Or more realistically, when one task starts, the other task should be finished by then. So, for example, let's say that you work at a construction site, and you're having materials delivered. You might want to tie the finish date of delivering materials to the start date of that part of the construction. That way, if the start date moves, the finish date moves as well, which effectively changes the delivery date. We'll look at that one a little bit more later. Right now, the important non-standard relationships for you to know about all plug into the sentence, the first task needs to blank before the second task blanks. And remember, the standard relationships are finish to start to start, and finish to finish. Make sense? Great. You can take a look at these relationships, and when you're ready, go ahead and move on into the next section, where we'll start applying them. So, we just learned about non-standard relationships, right? Let's learn how to apply them here. For example, we've got make the guest list, and create invites, and then proofread invites, right? And the way that it's set up right now is we have to totally finish creating the invites before we proofread the invites. If you've worked with designers, you've learned it's a pretty good idea to proofread the designs before it's totally finished. So we've just uncovered a non-standard relationship. The way you set a non-standard relationship is you double-click on the last task in the relationship sequence. So in this case, I would double-click proofread invites. If you double-click the wrong one, like I did about 1,000,000 times, you can just double-click the other one. Either way, click. And I'll go to the Predecessors tab. Remember, a predecessor is a task that comes before another. So we say, okay, we're talking about proofreading the invites, and the one that comes before is creating the invites. And look, right now it has a finish-to-start relationship, saying that creating the invites has to finish before proofreading the invites can start. Let's open this up and see what our other choices are. Start to start, finish to finish, and then start to finish, which we won't use most of the time except in a special situation. So it's either start to start or finish to finish. If we're talking about creating the invites and then proofreading the invites, which one do you think it would be? Now, most people initially jump with start to start. So let's see what happens. If I click start to start, so we have to start creating the invites before we can start proofreading, it sounds like it makes sense, right? And when I click OK, look what it did. Right now, it's saying that we're starting to proofread the invites at the same time that we're starting to create them. And as far as the schedule goes, we'll be finished proofreading before we're finished creating. So that doesn't work out too well. As human beings, we're very conditioned to think about the start times of things. Often, when you think a task might be a start to start, it actually turns out to be a finish to finish. Especially in the beginning, you really want to check yourself to make sure that everything turned out the way you wanted it to be. Let's see what happens when we put on a finish to finish. I'll double-click Proofread Invites and change it to finish. I click OK. Ooh, look at that. Now we're proofreading the invites right at the end of creating the invites, and we've saved a couple of days where people would have been just sitting around and doing nothing otherwise. Now this is pretty good so far, but you also see that we're finishing proofreading the invites on the same day that we're finishing creating the invites. Remember, Microsoft Project is not a minute-by-minute scheduler. It just says, here are the things you're doing today. Even so, that might be cutting it a little tight. If only there were a way to make the project just sort of maybe wait around for a day. If you've been going through this with me, you were probably here when we talked about lag. I'll double-click Proofread Invites, and let's put a day of lag on there. Ooh, look at that. Now our proofreaders will start proofreading a couple of days before the designers are all the way finished, which will nicely give us time for revisions, and also will maximize our time. Do you see how these non-standard relationships come in handy? Now, there are other times where the non-standard relationships aren't just handy, you need them to exist. For example, we were talking about video recording a meeting while the meeting happens. If you set up a normal link where those happen after each other, you're going to be very unhappy. Let me show you a way to uncover all of the non-standard links that you might encounter without having to think too much. Here's the way it works. You start all the way down at the bottom of all of your tasks, and you double-click the last task. Now you go to the Predecessors tab, which I'm conveniently already on, and you say, okay, we're talking about party over. Right now, it says that before the party is over, we have to totally finish having fun. Is that true? I mean, it's kind of a depressing thought. But for this project, that would be true. So we say, okay, great, and I click OK. And I go click the next one, click. Do I have to totally finish greeting the guests before I start having fun? Oh, maybe not. In fact, we could probably start those things at the same time. So in this case, I've found a start-to-start relationship. So I'll change that one right there to start. And I click OK. If I were to zoom in on my Gantt chart, you could see that now those two things are physically represented as starting at the same time. Pretty nice, right? So what you do is just basically swing through your whole project just like that. Click. No predecessors here? Okay. Click. Oh, does the shopping phase have to totally finish before we start the party phase? Yes, it does. So we're good, we click OK. And you move all the way up through the whole thing like that. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do this. On your file, go find yourself some non-standard links. You can move your way up through the project in a reverse order, like we just learned, or if you're some sort of non-standard linking genius, you can just intuit them. Personally, I like to have techniques. We're going to learn a really interesting situation that will make you happy and better than most people who use Microsoft Project on a day-to-day level. And we're going to do it with some non-standard techniques. If you look at the 3 tasks that I've got here, we've got sign the contract, and then order supplies, and then build the product, right? The thing is, if build the product moves, you want order supplies to move as well. So for example, let's say I sign the contract, and I'm going to link that to build the project. Link. And order supplies, and I link that to build the project. Link. You don't have to say link when you make the link, but it does kind of help. So right now, let's say we'll sign the contract, and then we're building the product, right? And maybe we'll have to send it through HR, and so we have some lag time in there. So I'll go double click, and HR wants a month of time to look through the contract and send it to legal. So I'll come in and I'll add a month of lag time. I click OK. Now I'm going to change my view here so I can see the entire project. So what we see is happening is we're signing the contract and ordering supplies pretty much right away. And then a month later, we're actually building it. You know, in the real world, it's a pretty good idea to order the supplies much closer to actual construction because we've all seen things change about 1,000,000 times. And if the job changes or goes away or the supplies are perishable or take up a lot of room, none of those are really great situations. So what we're going to learn here is a way to link ordering supplies to the start date of building the product. So that way, if build the product moves, ordering supplies will move as well. Pretty sophisticated, isn't it? Okay, here's how it works. What you might want to do is go ahead and create a little project that looks just like mine, where it just has 3 tasks: signing the contract, ordering supplies, and building the product. Go ahead and press pause and do that. Okay, now I'm going to link sign the contract to build the product. I'll put a little link in there. And I'll link order supplies to build the product. So we've got 2 different links going in to build the product. Whether or not this is how you really do something, it's just a nice setup for us here. So let's go ahead and do that. Press pause and make that work. Okay, let's see the situation happen that I was talking about a minute ago. So I'll go ahead and double click on build the product. And I'll put this time, let's just do 2 weeks of lag there. Sign the contract, 2 weeks of lag. Click OK. You can do that too if you like. If you want to, you can go up to View, to Entire Project, so you can see things nicely. Now we can see that ordering supplies didn't move, so that's not that awesome. Let's do this. I'm going to break that link, so go ahead and break it. And then these are the steps. Basically what I want to happen is I want this task to start and then tie to the finish date of this task. So the finish date will follow around the start of this task. So here's how it works. I'm going to link going upwards, so I'll say the start date of this task, hold Control and link up to order supplies. I'll create the link, which is doing something. It's going the other way here, and then I'll change the type. So I'll change the type to, instead of finish to start, I'll put on a start to finish. Click OK. Now you'll see their finish dates are tied together. And if I change the lag time, maybe just 1 week, they move together again. Alright, so let me show you that again real quick. I'll break the link here, so it's just regular old sitting here. So you link going up, and then you double click the higher one and change the type to start to finish. So you link going up and then change the top one to start to finish. Go ahead and try that now. Pretty interesting, isn't it? And sophisticated. You can go around your office tomorrow showing all these people the things that you've learned, and they'll all think you're pretty amazing. But wait, there's more. Let's say you'd like to give it a day or 2 of wiggle room, because deliveries aren't always on time. Good thing you know how to give wiggle room, right? That's right, lag. Now, lag works normally forward in time. You put a day of lag and it'll move a day forward. If you want to move it back in time, you put negative lag. You'll see here it's covering the weekend. Let's back it up a couple of days before the weekend. So I'll come in here and I'll give it a negative 3-day lag. So again, a negative lag moves backward in time. I click OK, and oh my goodness, look at how amazing we all are right now. So the idea here is that the supplies will be totally delivered 3 days before the product needs to be built. Pretty nice, right? You might want to play with this one yourself, or you can watch this section again. This is just so you know about as complicated as Microsoft Project gets. So if you're doing okay here, if this one feels a little shaky, join the club. Okay, remember, you link going up and then change the relationship to start to finish. Give it a shot, and when you're ready, you can move on to more glorious project management with Microsoft Project. Now, you've probably noticed that we haven't come in here and put in any deadlines or anything like that. And normally, projects start with a deadline, and so there's a very good reason that we didn't do it that way. You see, often deadlines are kind of arbitrarily picked, or when a project manager plans a project, they kind of massage it so that they can meet a deadline because they know they have that deadline. Best practice is to plan the project out as honestly as possible first, and then you see if you meet your deadlines. In fact, honesty is one of the key concepts that project management revolves around, and it doesn't mean lying or not lying. It means kind of being real. Project managers keep it real. Okay, but now we're going to come in and put in deadlines and also put in start dates. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do this. I'm going to go ahead and start up a new file. You don't really have to do anything. And let's say that we have 3 tasks. Task 1, Task 2, and Task 3. We can manually set any of these tasks to start and finish on a particular day. Instead of automatically scheduling, they call it manually scheduling, and it's one of the ways to set a start day. Now, before we do it, there are some disadvantages inherent in setting tasks as manually scheduled tasks. But the organization that you work for might do things like that, so let's take a look at it, and then I'll suggest another way for you. Let's say I'll set Task 3 to begin on February 1st. I can change the task mode to manually scheduled, and I can change the start day to February 1st, and I can either set a duration or I can set a finish date. It's kind of the same thing. If I set a finish date to February 5th, the duration changes to 5 days. Now, it's very important, and I do mean very important, that the only time you change the start or finish column is when you've already changed a task to be a manually scheduled task. Again, remember, manually scheduled happens over here. Project does some pretty strange things if you try to change the start and finish date without first changing the task to a manually scheduled task. So let's try that. Go ahead and do 3 tasks like I did in a new project. Change the 3rd task to a manually scheduled task, and then set the start and finish date. Okay, great. Now, this does work. There is a problem that comes along with it, though. And so let's look at that. Let's say Task 1 and Task 2 and Task 3 are all in sequence. Definitely, Task 2 needs to be finished before Task 3 happens. Now wait a minute, I linked them all together, and Task 3 just moved, didn't it? Now you can come in and then reset the days. Maybe I'll come right back here and say, happen on the 1st, and it goes back to where you want it to go. I mean, you can get yourself in trouble like that, but you could fix it as well. Now, let's say something different happened. Let's say our project is 500 lines long, and Task 2 duration changes. Somebody comes along and says, wow, we were way off base on that. It's actually going to take us about 3 weeks. Now, if you look at the Gantt chart, you'll notice I've got about 2 weeks of slack time in between Task 2 and Task 3, right? So it's going to cause trouble if Task 2 takes 3 weeks. So let's see what happens. I change it to 3 weeks. Ooh, And task 2 just blows right past task 3. Now there are some visual indications. You get this little scrubby sort of graphic. Over here you get the little red squiggly line that we're used to seeing when we have something spelled wrong. But that's about it. And frankly, that's not going to help us out too much if it's happening 400 lines down further than you can see. So, you can change tasks to be manually scheduled tasks, but you do have to be careful with them. You have to be careful that the task dates don't move when you don't want them to, and if that task has relationships, that you carefully manage them. Take a little bit of time and play with the manually scheduling. Remember, you're going to want to change the scheduling to manually scheduled before you change the start and finish date. And then when you're ready to move on, I'll show you another way that you can set start days on tasks that is a little bit safer to use. When you put in a start day on a task, or when you put a deadline on a task, wouldn't you like it if Microsoft Project alerted you if you did something that would make you miss that start day or that deadline? Of course you would. Everybody would love that. That sounds awesome. So, let's see how it works. I've got task 1, 2, and 3. I'll link those 3 tasks together. Link. And let's say that we want task 3 to start on February 2nd. Now, in the last section, we learned that you can do that by setting the task to be a manually scheduled task. We're going to do it in a different way that also gives us an alert if something goes wrong. Now, there's an important point here, and it is important. Unless you've already changed the task mode to manual, which we're not going to do here, it's important to never touch the start and finish column. I'll show you why, but it is important. And so if you're going to make a rule in Microsoft Project, one of the rules is don't ever touch the start and finish column unless you've changed the task to a manually scheduled task. Okay, well then you might be saying, how will we set a start date? What we'll do is constrain task 3 so that it starts on. Not before and not after, but it starts on February 2nd. Here's the way it works. If you double-click a task, on the Advanced tab, you have Constraints. I don't know why they put it on Advanced tab, because it's not advanced, you do it all the time. Right now we've got Constraint Type. As soon as possible is the default one, and it just means make the task happen whenever you can. I'll open that up. And look at all these lovely constraints we've got. If you need a task to start on a specific day, you'll choose Must Start On, right? And next to it, you'll choose the constraint date. And then you'll click OK. Now you get the warning message of all lovely warning messages that basically says, hey, are you sure you want to do what you just did? Note that it says, you set a must start on constraint on the task 3, and that this could result in a scheduling conflict either now or later because this task has one other task linked to it. And the whole idea here is we know that's why we're doing that. So it says, what do you want to do? Cancel? No. Continue, but use a start no earlier than constraint instead? No. Or continue and do what we said. Use a must start on constraint. That's the one we're going to do, and if you'd prefer not to have Project bug you about this, you can tell it don't tell me about this again. Now be careful because there is no way to undo this after you do it. So when you see these checkboxes about don't tell me about this again, make sure you really know what you're doing. In this case, we'll click continue. And I'll click OK. Oh. So look at what happened. I set a constraint by double-clicking, and on the Advanced tab, I said must start on for a certain day, and it moved it to that day. Before we move on, go ahead and hit pause and try it yourself. Put in a couple of tasks, double-click one of the tasks, and on the Advanced tab, set a must start on constraint. Now you're saying, that looks like it's pretty much the same thing as what we might have done before when we manually scheduled a task. Well, except it is a little bit different, and here's why. Let's say I'm working and doing some things. Maybe I had some other tasks that later I decided I spelled wrong, so I would get rid of them. And then somebody comes to me and says, hey, task 2, David, is actually going to take 3 weeks. So I say, okay, I guess I'll put that in there. So I change it to 3W, and ooh, what? This action will cause a scheduling conflict. Task 3 has a task constraint or is linked to a task that can't move. And as a result, the constraint or the link can't be set. This is the error message that pops up every time that you break any kind of constraint. And it pops up right away, which is pretty awesome, because you know what you just did, in this case, said that task 2 would take 3 weeks, can't work within the current confines of the project. Now, if you click continue, it's just going to blow right past task 3, so that's not really what you want to do. When you see this little guy with the broken little squiggly link, every single time you'll click cancel. You can click cancel by clicking cancel and clicking OK, or you can just click cancel on the big button that says cancel. What's important is that whenever you see this, you know that something just went wrong with one of your constraints. You click cancel, it puts it back the way it used to be, and you figure it out. So that might mean you have to do some pushback on task 2 can't take 3 weeks, or maybe you'll change the deadline. Either way, if task 3 were 400 lines down, it wouldn't be a vicious surprise in 2 months. You'd know about it right now. Nice, isn't it? Okay, here's what's important though. When you're practicing, and this happens in class all the time, so listen up. When you're practicing, if you set a constraint and then break it immediately, often the alert does not come up. It's just a bug in the program. So set a constraint, go do something. It doesn't matter what you do. Type your name, type some gibberish, get rid of the gibberish. Do something and then break the constraint. If you do something before you break the constraint, you'll get the alert popping up. In real life, you're not going to immediately break a constraint. You know what I mean? So, just for practice, let's do that. Okay, go set a must start on constraint, do something else, come back and break the constraint. Remember, you always hit cancel. Feeling pretty advanced? That's probably because you are. Feels good, doesn't it? Okay, let's learn how to remove a constraint, and then I'll show you a couple other little things. To remove a constraint is pretty easy. You just double-click the task with the constraint, and instead of the constraint type, you choose as soon as possible, which just makes that task start as soon as it can start. If you forget which one of these constraints is the default setting, just go check another task that doesn't have a constraint set on it. You see how when I chose as soon as possible, not only did it go back to where it used to be, the little constraint calendar icon went away? Pretty nice, right? Try that. Go ahead and hit pause. Go remove a constraint by setting the task back to as soon as possible. Okay, now people always want to know, well, why can't I set these start and finish columns? I mean, they're sitting there right in front of my face daring me to set them. Okay, you rebellious character, let me show you why. If I physically just go change the start column without setting the task to a manually scheduled task first, look what happens. I'm feeling pretty good. I set it, it says, hey, are you sure? And you're like, yeah, I do what I want. And so you click and it does move, right? If you see the little constraint icon, it actually set a constraint, so you're feeling pretty good. But when I open up the task, look at the constraint it set. It set a start no earlier than constraint. Start no earlier, yes, means that it won't start any earlier than in this case February 2nd, but later is totally fine. That's usually not what we want when we're setting a start day. That's why instead of start no earlier, you can manually set a start day by using must start on. Good? Okay. Practice setting start days a little bit here and there. This is something that for sure you'll do later on. Setting a start day with a constraint is the most effective and safest way to set a start day. It's also the safest and most effective way to set a deadline. Now, setting a deadline doesn't physically move the task. For example, let's say that we were going to set a deadline for task 2 on January 25th. All that means is that task 2 can't move past January 25th without triggering an alarm. Here's how it works. We'll double-click task 2, and on the Advanced tab in Constraints, we'll choose Finish No Later Than. Now, some people erroneously choose Must Finish On, but Must Finish On means absolutely on that date, no earlier. And usually with a deadline, earlier is fine. So we'll choose Finish No Later Than, and we'll click OK. And now, if I do something that makes task 2 miss its deadline, we'll get an alert just like we did when we set a start day constraint on task 3. Pretty nice, right? Okay, but wait 1 second. When I double-click task 2, you'll notice, or you might notice, that there seems to be a choice here for deadline specifically, which sounds pretty good. The problem is if you set that deadline, it doesn't set an alert. If you break the deadline, all it does is put a little red exclamation point next to that task. And again, if that task is 500 lines down, a little red exclamation point doesn't really help very much, does it? If you want to make a rule for yourself, deadlines and start days are best set with constraints. Now, of course, you can use constraints for the other types as well. If you have something that absolutely needs to finish on a specific day, well then Must Finish On comes in handy, doesn't it? Don't start any earlier than a specific day, or be careful not to start any later than a specific day. Constraints are pretty all-encompassing. For the most part, though, you use them for start days and for deadlines. Take a little bit of time to practice setting constraints, as they're some of the most important parts of using Microsoft Project. Now that we've learned all about constraints, let's go ahead and put a must start on constraint on our party day. So we're going to go ahead and pretend it's a 4th of July party. So I'll double-click the first task, Greet Guests. Go to Advanced. Choose Must Start On. And in July, the 4th of July is a Monday, which we'll get off, so why don't we do the 1st of July? That's a good time for a party. And we'll click OK. Now we'll notice, if I go to View an Entire Project, that yes, the party moved out, but now we're doing shopping way before the party ever happens. That's okay, because we know how to set links so that the party shopping will happen right before the party. Let's make that happen. Now currently, we've got a finish to start relationship set up between the shopping phase and the party phase. That means the shopping phase needs to finish before the party phase starts, which makes sense, but it doesn't tie the end of the shopping phase to the beginning of the party phase. So let's make that happen. I'm going to break this connection here. And you may remember that the way that we tie the start date to the finish date is you link upwards. I'm going to link to a task here. It actually doesn't let you do this for a phase. You do a regular link, and then you double-click and change the link relationship to start to finish. Now I can either do that to both of these tasks, or I can link these two tasks together. I'm just going to do it to both. So you'll note that the Gantt chart is getting a little bit wonky looking over here, but it's doing what we want. Notice that buying food and drinks both finishes on the same day that we're setting up the party. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now, if we wanted to, we could set deadlines on mailing the invites and anything else that would make sense, but for the purposes of this exercise, we're doing pretty well so far. Okay, if you'd like to go ahead and do that on your party project, feel free. Otherwise, come with us, and we'll move on to the next parts of planning a project. By default, Microsoft Project thinks that you're working a normal Monday through Friday, sort of 8 to 5 kind of day. That's why if you tell it a task is going to take 4 days, and you start on Friday, it'll tell you, great, you'll be finished on Wednesday, not on Monday. But what if that's not true? What if your company has a different type of schedule? Or what if some of your resources have different schedules? Or what if there are certain tasks, like meetings, that only happen at certain times? Well, in that case, you'll need to change the working time. Basically, you'll change the calendar. You can apply a calendar to a task or a resource that's working. You can apply a calendar to a task or to a resource. Keep in mind that if you have different task calendars and resource calendars, when you assign a resource to complete a task, those calendars have to overlap. Here's how you work with calendars. You'll go up to the top of the screen where you'll see the Project tab. The Project tab is where you'll do things that are project-wide, for example, changing the working time. When I give that a click, here we've got our standard project calendar. Notice down at the bottom you've got exceptions to the normal calendar, which basically means days off. And then you can change the settings for the full work week. Let's give ourselves a day off or two because that sounds pretty awesome. For example, let's say that we work in a company that likes to give us a lot of days off. Sounds good to me. So Groundhog Day is one of our holidays. You can either scroll to February 2nd and click it, or later you can just type in the dates. But once you know which date you want, down under the exceptions, you name the exceptions. If you like, you can fill in the start to finish, or it'll automatically fill in based on what you selected in the calendar. Take a second, press pause, and go ahead and give yourself off Groundhog Day. Okay, by the way, you don't have to do every holiday. You can download calendars and make those part of your global template. You'll learn how later on. But let's say you need to change the actual time that you work or the days that you work on. That all happens here under Work Weeks. When I click Work Weeks, I can either make a special work week, for example, the time in between Christmas and New Year's, or I can change the default work week. To change the default work week, you simply double-click it. You'll note that you'll have Monday through Friday. You'll note that you'll have Sunday through Saturday. And if you click a day, you'll see the default times that are already set. And above, you've got options to use the project default times, or to set the days for non-working days, like Sunday and Saturday are already set, or you can set the days to a specific time. So you'll note that Monday through Friday are now 8 through 5 with a 1-hour break in the middle. If we highlight that, we can change that if we like. So we'll set it to specific working times. Maybe we don't start until 9, but we leave at 6. You can come in and put in 15-minute breaks and things like that because it adds up after a while. If we're working on Sunday, we'd come in and set Sunday working times. Just so you know, there's already a night shift and a 24-hour calendar. So you can run a 24-hour calendar on a task, and then let resource calendars control when the resource is available to work on that task. Now when I click OK, I've changed my default work week. Go ahead and try it. Click Work Weeks, double-click Default, and change your Monday through Friday to 9 to 6. You'll remember that calendars can be assigned to tasks or to resources, so sometimes you'll make a new calendar. If you're trying to make a calendar just for one resource, you normally won't do it this way. You'll work on that one resource after you learn how to work on resources. But if there's a calendar that you'll apply to multiple resources, meaning people, then you'll do it like we will right now. So we'll go back to change working time, and then you can create a new calendar. Now you can call it whatever you want. If you create a new calendar, it'll be totally blank. If you create a copy of the standard one, it'll start the same way that the standard calendar starts. That way you can keep all of your holidays. Maybe I'll call mine Programmers. Maybe I'll call mine Designers. And I'll click OK. Note that now we're working on the Designer calendar. Let's say that designers do one of those 4-day work weeks, except that they work 10 hours a day. So I'll come down to work weeks, and I'll change the default work week. I'll change Monday to non-working time, and Tuesday through Friday, designers would still like to come in at 9, but they'll go home at 8. Whew, that's a long day. 3-day weekends sure are nice, though. When I click OK, now I have a calendar available that I can assign to designers later on, but also to tasks if I prefer. If I click OK, now I can assign that calendar to a task. Under Create Invites, I'll double-click the task and basically look around until I find it. It happens to be on the Advanced tab under Calendar. And I'll choose Designers. You may notice that the project gently shifts. And this icon displays, letting you know that you've set a non-standard calendar for the task. Go ahead and create a calendar and apply it. You can work with the party project, and then you might want to play with the project on your own. Aside from assigning people to work the tasks, we've pretty much got our project planned out. Now, assuming that people will be able to do these tasks within the time allotted, which isn't always the case, now is a safe time to decide when we will begin work. Note that often, if you were to plan, note that our nature is to say we'll start a project on a certain day and then we'll start planning it. We're doing it in a different way though. We plan the project, set all of our deadlines, and then say when we're going to start the project. This gives us the safety to estimate durations as exact as possible, and still leave ourselves some wiggle room by starting work earlier than we strictly need to. To start the project on a particular day, we go to the Project tab up at the top and choose Project Information. And here's the start date. Notice that you'll also see a finish date, which is sometimes attractive to people. In general, you always want to plan a project from a start date. Otherwise, Microsoft Project will pile up any floating tasks at the end of the project, which is generally when you don't want floating tasks. So I'll change the start date to February 1st. And I'll click OK. I didn't get any warnings, so that sounds fine with me. In the advanced part of this class, you will learn how to get a harder date about when's the latest you can start the project, and then you back it up a little bit from there. Until you learn that, it's okay if you wiggle around with a start date a little bit. Now's a good time to stop and build a project from scratch. Make a list of tasks. Break those tasks out into phases. Give all the tasks durations. Then link all the tasks together. After that, you'll look for non-standard links. Finally, you'll put constraints on a task and set the project start date. Don't worry too much about memorizing all of this. A cheat sheet accompanies this learning module. It does have some things in it that you haven't learned yet, but life is a journey, isn't it? Hello, project managers. For the next couple of parts, we're going to make a very simple project so that our project plan itself isn't very complicated, so we can just focus on assigning resources, which is what the next couple parts are about. So go ahead and start up a new file, and make sure that down at the bottom yours says New Tasks Auto-Scheduled. If it doesn't, you might have to click that and change it to Auto-Scheduled, or you can change it in the options like we did in the first module. Okay, so let's go ahead and just make a very simple project. We'll do Task 1 and Task 2, and surprisingly enough, Task 3. We're going to go ahead and link Task 1 to Task 3. So on the Task tab, I'll link that. And we'll link Task 1 to Task 3 as well. Now here's a nice time to talk about a really important part of using Microsoft Project in general. We're going to make a rule, and if you don't follow that rule, sooner or later it's going to turn around and bite you. So here's the rule. Ready? All tasks should be linked to another task. So note that Task 1 is linked to Task 3 and Task 2 is linked to Task 3. The only task that doesn't need to be linked to something else is the last task in line. Now theoretically, you might look at a task and go, I can do that whenever. But in reality, it has to be finished before something. If nothing else, it needs to be finished before the final delivery date. Later, when things start getting really complicated, Microsoft Project will actually shift your schedule for you. This is a great thing, unless, of course, it's moving tasks past other tasks that it shouldn't be moving them past. And that can happen if the task isn't linked to anything. Either way, let's make sure that all of our tasks are always linked to another task. It's one of the important rules in Microsoft Project. Now that we have a pretty simple project to work with, let's start assigning people to work on this project. In project manager language, workers are generally referred to as resources. Now really, a resource is any limited resource. A room or a piece of machinery can all be referred to as a resource, but in general, when you hear project managers talking about resources, they're talking about people. So let's put in some people that are available to work. So I'm going to change my view to the view where you list out resources. It makes sense that that's on the View tab. Now you might notice that there is a Resource tab as well, so sometimes you'll look in more than one place. But to make your big old list of resources, you go to View to the Resource sheet. Now you'll notice that everything changes here, and this is probably the first time that we've seen this happen. To get back to the Gantt chart, we go to the same View tab and switch back to the Gantt chart. You might want to try that a couple of times. Press the pause button, go to View to the Resource sheet, and then make sure you can get back out by going to View to the Gantt chart. Okay, so I'll go to View to the Resource sheet, and we'll put in a couple of resources. The first resource is David. That's me. I do everything around here anyway. And you'll notice that there's some things that filled in automatically. For example, if David is a worker, you'll leave this alone and keep it on work. You can say that David is a material, like a room or photocopier, or that David is a fixed cost, like a contract payment. For right now, we're just going to work with work. Now, some of these columns we might remove later, but if you did say that David was a material, in the material column you could say what type of material he is. Initials generally are for sorting, and group is for worker group. So for example, if David was under the manager group, I could write manager in there, and then later I could filter for all the managers when I'm assigning workers. Generally, you'll only do this type of thing when you have lots and lots of people working there. Now this next part here is the important part. Do you see it says max and says 100% under it? Basically, it means what's the maximum effort that someone will put into a task. So let's say that I said, okay, David, how long would that task take you to do? And David says, about 2 weeks. And I say, will you be working on that every second of the day? And David says, no way. So I say, well, David, how long will you be working on it during each day if you had to estimate? And David might say about 50%. What that means is that David now has 50% of his time to work on other tasks. So when we assign resources, we will also assign a percentage of that resource's available time. Once that resource's time reaches 100%, then you won't be able to assign the resource to more work without over-allocating the resource. Either way, 100% is generally what you'll put in for one person. If instead of a named resource like David, you wrote a group of resources like programmers, then max will generally equal the number of programmers that you have. For example, 5 programmers, 500%. Make sense? Great. Okay. If you're going to be using project to calculate costs, then you can put a standard rate in, and an overtime rate, or a cost per use rate. Project will keep track of your cost on a prorated basis for you, meaning it'll charge the cost as the work is done, or you can tell it, no, just do all the cost right in the beginning, like a pay up front kind of contract, or at the end. Now remember, we said that you can apply a calendar to a resource? That's what we're working with here, the standard calendar. Note that I've got 24 hours, night shift, standard, or any other calendars that I might have made. Code again is just for job code, and it is for sorting. So I'll add another resource here I'll call Sandy. Sandy's a regular work resource. And under group, I'll just write worker. Again, Sandy will be maximum at 100%, and she doesn't make as much as David's $500 an hour. Sandy only makes a paltry $400 an hour. Okay, so get yourself to View to Resource Sheet and put in a couple of resources. In a little bit, we're going to assign them, so you might want to call them David and Sandy. Although if you want to get all rebellious and name them after yourself, you go right ahead. Now you've created this beautiful resource sheet, and let's say that David puts in a request for vacation. You probably wouldn't want to go make a whole calendar just so David can have a vacation request. Which is why it's pretty easy to individually edit the resource. Basically, all you do is double-click the resource. And you'll notice the resource information pops up. So right now, David's available from any date to any date at 100%. If I'm going to change this at all, I'll have to put in dates before the change. So maybe I'll say that David's available from today until next week, and then next week on Tuesday, David goes on vacation, and he's gone that whole week. So I'll put 0%. Make sense? Now, if I try to assign David to anything during that week, it'll tell me that David's over-allocated or unavailable. Go ahead and double-click a resource and give that resource some vacation. Remember, you do have to put in the time before the vacation for Microsoft Project to accept the vacation. Okay, to remove that, you'll basically just highlight the line and hit delete. I'll remove those and click cancel. Now notice also if I double-click David, there's a tab about specific costs and the effective dates. So for example, if David has different pay rates during different date ranges, you can notate that here. You can leave notes on a resource, and later we can even build custom fields. What you want to remember is you can double-click a resource to set individual calendar or availability dates. We've entered in a few simple tasks and built a resource sheet. So let's learn how to assign resources. I'm on the resource sheet right now, so I'm going to go back to View, to Gantt chart, where my tasks are. There are a number of ways to assign resources. This one that I'm going to show you is my favorite. To get there, you go to Resource and click Assign Resources. you get this little box popping up. Now note that your resources are in front of you. Units really should say percentage because that's what they're talking about. So for example, if David's available to work 100% of his time on a particular task, you can put 100% in here, or 50%, or so on. Now this box that we just opened generally stays open until you're done assigning resources, so feel free to leave it open. Here's how it works. Let's say that task 1 is going to be completed by David. So I'll click task 1 and then click David, and I can either type 100% in units or just click assign, which normally just assigns 100%. And you'll notice that now it says David next to it. Let's say that task 2 is going to be done by David and Sandy. So the duration for all three of these is 1 day. I'll say, hey David, you said it would take 1 day to do task 2. Is that 1 day of working all day long? And David says, no, I was probably only going to spend half of my time doing that. So you say, great. And down in the units, you put 50%. Now, one thing you might notice here is that now David's spending 100% on task 1 and 50% on task 2, which means officially David's been over-allocated. When you over-allocate resources, you might notice that right away you get a little red man icon showing you that it's over-allocated. Later we'll learn how to fix over-allocations. Right now, let's just assign people. So as we were saying, Sandy is also going to be working on the task. So I'll click Sandy and give her a 50% as well. It is important that you talk to resources or resource managers and find out how much of the resource's available time is going to be spent on each task. That way, you know if you can assign the resource to work somewhere else. So on task 3, I'll assign Sandy. We'll assign Sandy 100%. So it's not very difficult to assign resources. In a little bit, you'll learn some nice tricks though. Go ahead and make yourself a fake little project, make sure you have some resources available to you on the resource sheet, and assign the resources by going to Resource to Assign Resources. So sooner or later, you're going to have to change resource assignments. Either because a resource is no longer available, or other resources become available, or you decide that a resource will probably need to spend more of their time to complete a task in the duration that you need it completed in. Now let's say you had one person working on a task, and then you came and also assigned another person to work on that very same task. Depending on what the task is, the task should take half of the time to do, right? Well, so that's one of the things with Microsoft Project. If you change task assignments, often Microsoft Project will change the duration as well. Now, sometimes that's great, but other times that's not what you want to have happen. So here's what you'll have to do. You'll have to be cognizant of it. That when you change a resource assignment, Microsoft Project might change the duration of that task. If you don't like the change it's made, you can just come change the duration right back to what you want it to be. Here, let's look at this example. So you'll notice on task 2, I've got David and Sandy, and they're both working half of their available time on that task. Let's say that all of a sudden, we said, oh, you know what? There is no way that we're going to get that task done in a day by working half of our time. Let's free up some other stuff and let David and Sandy both work 100% of their available time on that task. So I'll click the task, and I'll change David here to 100%, and I'll change Sandy to 100%, and look what happened to the duration of the task. It changed to half a day, didn't it? Now sometimes that might be exactly what you want. You're spending twice the time, so it should take half the time to do. In this case, that's not true, so we'll just go change the duration back to 1 day. Now this is something that really got me when I first started working with Microsoft Project. You can see how it could be helpful, right? But you can also see how it could catch you if you weren't aware of it. Either way, If you make a resource assignment and then you come back and change it, you do want to check the duration to make sure that Microsoft Project didn't make any changes that you don't want. If it did, it's okay to change the duration. It won't affect the work assignments. Sometimes the best way to not overallocate resources is to assign the right resources in the beginning. But if you're working on a big project, it's pretty difficult to remember who you assigned and who you didn't. So let me show you a great trick that'll show you what resources are available. I'm going to clear the resource assignment from Task 2 and Task 3. I'll just highlight Task 2 and 3 and click Remove. And I'll remove David as well. So you notice that we've already got David working 50% on Task 1 at the same time that Task 2 is happening. So I'm going to click on Task 2 and I'll say, okay, who should I assign? Now it's pretty easy right now, but again, imagine if this were a great big project. Do you see this little plus here showing you that there's more things under the resource list options? When I open that up, one of the best things that you've got available for you here is right here, the Available to Work checkbox. If I click that box, it starts with 1 hour. So notice that David is already spending half of his time working on Task 1. If I only need someone to work for an hour on Task 2, David's fine. How about 2 hours? 3 hours? 4 hours? But look what happens if I crank it up to 5 hours of availability. David disappears. If you like, you can just crank it up to 8 hours and see who's available. You can also filter for resources by filtering for all resources or specific groups. Remember when we created our resource sheet, we had managers and workers. We could type those group names here and filter for the resources that we needed to do a specific job. Take a second and experiment with the resource list options. Again, the most useful one is probably this Available to Work. Let's dig a little deeper into resource assignment. Now remember, you might not have to do all of this on your own. You might be sitting with a scheduling manager or a direct functional manager who normally manages these resources. Right now, we're going to do everything ourselves. So I've got Task 1 and David's already assigned 50%. Now I'll assign David to work on Task 2 at 100%, and we'll notice with the little red men that David becomes over-allocated. We've got a choice to make right now. We know that if we change the units to 50%, David will no longer be over-allocated, but then the duration might not stay the same. So we could talk to some people who know what they're talking about and say, hey, if David only worked on that half of his day, how long would it take then? If we changed it to 50%, and then somebody said, well, that would probably take 2 days, well then good, because that's what it just changed the duration to automatically. If somebody said that would take 1.5 days, we could change it by hand like that, and it would still work without being over-allocated. Of course, we could also assign someone else to work if that were available. Now I'm going to say that it just wasn't possible to do it in any other way, so I'll put it back on a day, and I'll change David's units back to 100% here. I'll make sure the duration is what I need it to be, which was the original 1 day. And I'll also assign Sandy to work on that. Sandy's going to spend 100% of her time as well. And Sandy will do Task 3. So while we were making resource assignments, we decided whether or not we could level everything out by using our brain. Some people like to do it this way. They massage the schedule as they go. Other people would instead prefer to just go down the list and assign resources, and then deal with the over-allocations afterwards. You could be either type of person, but take this opportunity to over-allocate somebody, and then fix that over-allocation by changing the units and the duration. When you're done, put it back so that the person's over-allocated again, and we'll learn how to deal with that. So let's say that you've got an over-allocation like we have here, and you can't fix it by changing the resource assignment. If you have a strong preference which task happens first, you can either set a manually scheduled task or create a task relationship with a link. If you don't have a preference, it's best to leave it alone, because after you have 400, 500 different tasks, it can get fairly complicated to juggle the schedule by hand. Instead, let the computer come in and decide what it's best to move. Now, it's important that if you are going to let the computer level out over-allocations, that you've been very careful about setting deadlines and start date constraints. Also, it's important that every task is linked to at least one task. That way, the computer won't accidentally move a task past one that it shouldn't have moved past. Now, when the computer levels out over-allocated resources, it calls that leveling, and that's what we'll do in a minute. First, it's important that we set a couple of leveling options. You only have to do this one time, but it is important that you do it. To change these leveling options, I'm going to go to the Resource tab and click this button called Leveling Options. If you look down at the bottom of the Leveling Options window, you'll see checkboxes, yes? Basically, we're going to remove all of these checkboxes. Here's why. Note that by default, leveling can adjust individual assignments on a task. That's not good. You basically want to be in control of that. And by default, leveling can create splits in the remaining work, which basically means that the computer can say, okay, stop that task, go do another task, and then come back to this task. Now, if the task is a meeting or baking a cake or something like that, you can't stop right in the middle, so we don't want it doing that either. And then the last checkbox says that leveling can adjust manually scheduled tasks. The whole point of a manually scheduled task is that it happens exactly when you told it to happen. So these three checkboxes are not probably the best to have available right now. Go ahead and pause the video. Even if you don't have Project open, now is a good time to open it. Go up to the Resource tab and click Leveling Options. Then you'll want to remove all of the checkboxes down at the bottom of the Resource Leveling Options dialog box. Okay, now that you've done that, you can click OK. Now I'm going to close my assigned resources just because I basically don't need it opening right now. And here's what we can do. Up at the top, you've got buttons for leveling. When I click Level All, Microsoft Project is going to analyze which is the best task to move, and it'll move those tasks. The way that it does it is it looks at the project and it decides, well, what tasks can I move that will affect the finish date of the project the least? So if you move one task, and that moves another task, and that moves another task, and the finish date of the project moves out a week, the program will elect to move a different task if it affects the finish date of the project less. If both of those are the same, it'll move a task that affects the lower number of resources. And if all of those are the same, which it generally never is, then Microsoft Project says, meh, and just moves the last one in line. To level, you click Level All. And you'll see here that it moved the task that affected the lower number of resources. Neat, right? Now in the advanced part of this class, we'll learn how to tell exactly what leveled and how much it leveled. Right now, you'll kind of just have to eyeball it. If something went wrong, for example, maybe you should have had a deadline on task 1, what you'll do is clear the leveling, make the change, and then level again. I'll put a deadline on task 1. I'll double-click the task. And on the Advanced tab, I'll change the constraint date to finish no later than the 18th, which is when it's finishing right now. Now when I level, you'll notice that the constraint is honored and the other task moved. Pretty neat, isn't it? Again, before you level, it is important to shut off the leveling option checkboxes on the bottom and to make sure that all of your tasks are linked to some other task and that your constraints, meaning deadlines and start days, are thoughtfully set. Go ahead and take some time. Create a small project, assign resources, over-assign those resources, and then experiment with leveling. Level and then clear the leveling. Then set a constraint and level again and see what happens. Now, leveling can be a little bit scary because Microsoft Project is moving tasks. It's much less scary if you're cognizant of the idea that every task needs to be linked to another task and that your constraints need to be thoughtfully set. In the advanced part of this class, we'll add a column that'll show you exactly what was leveled and how much. You might imagine that when you first sit down to do your first big real project with Microsoft Project, it can be a little bit intimidating and maybe even overwhelming. The whole idea of this software is you have a great big project that is intimidating and overwhelming sitting in front of you. And so just thinking about that can be a lot. When you're not really comfortable with the software, it can be even more intimidating.